I'm the Director of Marketing and Education for Westar. And in keeping with a theme that I've tried to pick up a little bit on, talking to one of our newer scholars, we're talking to Dr. Steve Watkins, who is at the University of Louisville teaching Christian studies and classics. And Steve, we've had a little bit of time to chat about your work in evangelicalism. So I will just open it up to you and let you talk a little bit more about that and kind of the projects that you have been and are working on.
Great. Yeah, so I came out of an evangelical background myself. I went to a very fundamentalist seminary in Los Angeles. Young and not knowing what I was really after, was kind of seduced into the logic and rhetoric of fundamentalism, which is very seductive in some ways. It's, everybody wants certainty and perfect answers and perfect moral codes, but if you're curious at all, you find out pretty quickly that it's pretty flimsy stuff. So anyway, moved on from there, pastored a church for about 9 years, which about finished me off. And then I stepped down in 2008 to enter a PhD program at University of Louisville, which is where I now teach. So I guess it's like a lot of things in life, like whatever is close to your heart is the thing that you kind of want to go after and explore and figure out. So for me, it was fundamentalism, and this whole phenomena of fundamentalism, and what were the dynamics, how does it work, and what's the landscape of it. So there's also the word evangelicalism, which is a larger, broader term, which really incorporates people on all kinds of different levels, whether conservative or progressive or whatever you'd want to say. Fundamentalism is a phenomena that a lot of people are surprised started in the 20th century, the early 20th century. So it's a modern, really, really recent phenomenon. And it was launched by a group of conservative Protestant pastors and Bible teachers in and around Biola, and some other places. Biola kind of became a flagship, Bible Institute of Los Angeles, for those who don't know. And they launched a series of pamphlets called the Fundamentals. And it was really, there's a lot to say about it, but it was really a reaction to German higher criticism, which was, historical criticism that most scholars use. And they saw it as a threat to miracles and the supernatural and virgin birth and things like that. And their one big thing is inerrancy, that the inerrancy of the Bible is a non-negotiable presupposition of fundamentalists. And they try, although they have their own tensions, they try to interpret stuff what they call literally. It sounds real good on the surface that, oh yeah, we take it, at face value, but there's a lot of stuff that it's cherry picking. You look at one section of scripture, they're not taking it literal, and another section they are taking literal. So anyway, that's kind of the landscape of it all. So in my PhD program, and I got a PhD in humanities, which was a very, I love it because it took forever to get through because we had to apply at least 2 or 3 fields of research. So I used hermeneutics from Hans-Georg Gadamer, Norman Fairclaw's discourse analysis, and some information theory from Mark C. Taylor to try to analyze a functioning live fundamentalist culture. So living in Kentucky at the time, not very far away was the Creation Museum, which opened in 2007, about a year before I began my PhD program. And my doctoral dissertation mentor and director, Marianne Stenger, who was actually a Tillich scholar, told me, you should do this. You should definitely do the Creation Museum. And at first I was like, man, this is like the Flat Earth Society. Is anybody going to take me seriously? But come to find out, now I've got a contract with a publisher. I've gotten several publications out of this stuff. So yeah, there is interest. And a lot of it is because of the culture wars kind of in society and popular cultural studies. So anyway, that's what I wrote my dissertation on, the museum. I looked at their politics, their language, their use of language and rhetoric. And it's a deep rabbit hole. So I'm currently just had a chapter come out in a book called Christian Tourist Attractions, Myth Making and Identity Formation, edited by Aaron Roberts and Jennifer Isle. So my chapter in here is titled Rival Epistemologies and Constructed Confusion. So I'm looking at how they set up a competing world of epistemological structures, and it's actually very postmodern what they're doing. It's Thomas Kuhn all over, writ large, but of course they would eschew that they are postmodernists, but they're operating very postmodern in their approach to media and technology. So I'm working on a book. That chapter just came out, and so I have a book coming out, hopefully, whenever I can get it written, on the Creation Museum. And what I'm going to be doing in that book is looking at how the Creation Museum is a textbook case of what we call pseudoscience. And pseudoscience it's interesting because it fools a lot of people. I mean, there's a lot of the stuff that goes on that way outside of just creationism. Everything from there's flat Earth movement right now. All kinds of a book just came out by an anthropologist I've worked with on these ancient alien shows and finding Bigfoot and all this stuff here. We're like, they should call the show Not Finding Bigfoot. It's a big, pseudoscience is a big orb. So I'm looking at how it functions and why it's seductive for people. And that's the thing that's most interesting to me, where it's a deep appeal to common sense, which isn't, that sounds good too. And it's really, really very American, because American, I mean, as a whole, and this is a broad, and Susan Jacoby has written on this and some others, that, in American culture, there's this disdain for the expert. There's this kind of good enough for my daddy, good enough for me. I don't want to listen to some fancy scholars, popping off and talking mumbo jumbo. And a real individualistic, suspicion of the expert. And so it gets a lot of traction. And I think one of the surprising things I found at the Creation Museum was that they have at least four, I know for sure, PhD holders that work there, and they're like their top column researchers. But these PhDs are from Ohio State, Indiana University, Brown College, or Brown University, and University of Sydney. So we're not talking about some fundamentalist Bible college. We're talking about legit. So anyway, exploring all of that is what I'm about right now, and trying to explain it in the context of pseudoscience. And I guess just some future things I'm looking at. I'm wanting to get through. When I get through the book on the Creation Museum, I really want to get into looking at a movement in Kentucky of Amish influx. I think I'm going to go away from fundamentalism and look at more traditional societies, utopian groups, and kind of go in that direction. And Amish aren't fundamentalists technically; they're traditionalists, pietists, but they're not. They don't fit the fundamentalist mold. And then I'm also writing a book on pacifism. It's what I'm really excited about. I'm just writing it. I don't have a contract for it, but I was a former Navy SEAL, and kind of had a come to Jesus about war and the destructive nature of it. So I hope to be a unique voice, one who's a former combat vet writing on pacifism, and I'm getting into a lot of things too, not just violence and war, but the Me Too movement, what I call malevolence and male violence. Why is most of the violence 98% male? What's going on? So anyway, that's a project I'm working on, and my long-term goal is to try to synthesize some of the thought of Jack Caputo and Mark C. Taylor. They're like two guys that have blown my mind, and they're coming from a little bit different points of view, but there's already a paper written about comparing their trajectories. And I think there's something there. I was telling Jack in Santa Rosa that I said some of the End of the Folly of God, which is one of his books. He's using the language of complex adaptive networks, even though he's not claiming to use that. So complex adaptive networks, complexity, information theory are things that Taylor's really run with. And I would like to try to figure it all out, but I've been studying Taylor for about 10 years now. It'll probably take me another 10 years to wrap my head around Caputo and see if I can do anything with it. But that's just,
Yes.
these are great thinkers of our time. So
Yeah.
it takes
Yeah.
a while to.
Yeah.
So that's like the landscape of what I'm doing.
That's exciting. Cool. You said something back a little bit when you were talking about, your initial project around the Creation Museum and fundamentalism, and that was kind of interesting. I mean, one of the things that was interesting around there being a lot of interest in that work, and when you were maybe a little bit nervous, like going into it, if there would be. And I'm curious where you see that interest lying, because oftentimes I do think in, progressive or people that are more familiar with historical criticism, there is that skepticism of studying evangelicalism or fundamentalism or some of the less critical methods of faith and theology. So I'm curious, like, where you've seen that interest and what has made people interested in that project.
Yeah, it's probably like a lot of things, multi-layered. I would say, for starters, the amount of money they've been able to raise and the amount of people that they brought into that place is quite amazing. $27 million facility, and they just built an ark, a Noah's Ark, that was over 100 million. I mean, this thing is no joke. It's like, for them to be able to raise that kind of money is impressive, and to get that many people, many of whom are educated people. I mean, they've got college degrees, many of them, not all of them, to come. And I mean, look, it's just a phenomenon. It's like, it's like the Americana. Like, what is this thing? It's got a petting zoo. It's got zip lines. Like, what is it actually at the end of the day? And that's another fun aspect of what I'm dealing with, because they call it a museum, but I realized, wait a second, you ripped off. A museum should be a legitimate museum. You can call anything whatever you want to call it, but like it's the academic expression of research for the public. And I mean, a legitimate museum, as I see it, whether it's anthropology or an art museum, is where the experts weigh in on the current understanding of a model of whatever, of history, natural history, whatever. And so that, like, when I got into like looking at what I was like, I asked them, number one, who's your curator? And they said, oh, we don't have one of those. I'm like, well, most museums do. And then I said, well, what is your central collection of artifacts? And they're like, why would we need that? I'm like, well, fossils, collections. I mean, I don't know. So the more I dug at this concept of why are you calling it a museum, I saw they're using the rhetoric of the academy. And one of the things that's come out of my research is they've kind of aped the academy. They appropriate the museum, they have a lecture hall, they hire PhDs, they have their own publishing house, they footnote their material. And it's all of this that's like, well, as critical as you are of the academy, you're really trying to ape the academy on your own little level. So anyway, I think another reason why it's gotten a lot of interest is because, well, for one, from the academy, people just don't understand it. They're like, it's just like a freak of nature. Like, how could you live in a modern scientific era like we live in and believe that Earth is 6,000 years old? I mean, on one level, it's kind of nuts, but on another level, it functions for an awful lot of people. And like I say, they can't all be just, stupid. I mean, I don't assume, but so, and then there's also been this rise of Christian tourists. That's what this book is about, Christian tourist attractions. There's a new Bible museum in Washington, D.C. by the Hobby Lobby family. Very, very expensive, like 100 and some million. I think maybe a couple hundred million. It's incredible. The Holy Land experience in Orlando, this thing, and the Ark. So there's just kind of a cultural curiosity by a lot of folks that are like, I like to categorize them, and they would be people that would like read the Fourth R publication. They're smart, educated people, but not specialists in necessarily religious studies, but they get a lot out of the Fourth R articles because it's specialists, translating it. I kind of think of the interest coming from kind of the Vanity Fair New Yorker crowd. They're just curious and they're just interested in this. What is this? And so I think just the foreignness for a lot of people creates its own curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
And then yeah, it seems like there was something else, I think, for popularity. Well, really, there was a debate between Bill Nye, the science guy, and Ken Ham.
Yeah.
And I actually secured tickets to it. I wrote an article for the National Center for Science Education on the debate. And I went with my colleague who's an anthropologist, and we just got lucky to get tickets because they only had, I mean, it was like they had 900 seats, and it sold out in a matter of minutes. I just happened to get online and get them like lucky. But that debate, I was getting texts from friends during the debate that it was trending like up to near #1 on Twitter. And so this was just, I never knew it would be that big, but so many people know Bill Nye and grew up with Bill Nye, his teachings, that it just became incredibly, I don't know, there was this credible amount of interest. And then what kills me is, I mean, this is just my own opinion, obviously, like everything, but the popularity of Nye coming and doing that quote unquote debate, I'm actually writing on that right now, what happened. It caused the Creation Museum to raise massive amounts of money to build the Ark. And like Eugenie Scott out at National Center for Science Education said, "Don't do it, Bill. Don't entertain the same stage of this guy." And everybody was saying, "Oh, I don't think you should do this." But anyway, he did it, and one of the end results was it raised millions of dollars for the Creation Museum, which to me is kind of a little sad. But anyhow,
yeah.
So that's some of why I think it is. The other thing too, the entertainment value. This is a concept that I've thought about because early fundamentalists tend to be pretty, you know, as Stan Hauerwas says, they're pissed off. They're like not very happy people. They're mad, and he said the difference between an evangelical and a fundamentalist is they pretty much have the same theology, but the fundamentalist is mad at the world. The evangelicals are happier. It's kind of interesting. But what I've thought about a lot recently is that this whole zip lines, petting zoos, dinosaurs everywhere. Who doesn't like dinosaurs? Kind of like putting the fun in fundamentalism. As this idea, like, because the old school ones were more like kind of hardcore, angry white men. Mm-hmm. So, and they also are very clever. Like they try to use anti-racial arguments. Like they say, we're not racist because no. What goes on there is interesting on another level, but they'll say, we're not racist because God created us all one family. We're all one human family. We came from Adam and Eve. So there is no real race. And, you know, I would kind of tend to agree with that, you know, humans are humans. We don't, I mean, we can talk about ethnic differences and phenotypic differences, but humans are humans. You know, we're all one species for the most part, I think. Yeah. Anyway, they'll use these tricky arguments to say, yeah, we don't discriminate against any kind of racial minority or whatever. The flip side of that is, though, on my visits, and I've talked to other scholars on this, it's almost, it's like, I don't want to give a figure, but I've seen very few minorities around that place. It's like 95% white, middle class. And even their arguments, like in this one particular display in the museum, I'm just giving a sampling of how this world just it creates curiosity because it's just so bizarre. They have a dig site where and this is that rival epistemology stuff, right, that I was writing on. So they'll say, here's an evolutionist scientist, here's a creationist scientist. Now they both study the same facts, but one of them concludes the Earth is 6,000 years old. The other concludes that it's millions and so forth. So in this one display, they had two mannequins that looked like archaeologists digging up a Utah raptor or something. And so the white guy, who's white as can be with a white beard, is the creationist. And the dark skin, he looks like a Native American, is the evolutionist. Like, and it's like, there you go. And then they have this other part about what happens if you don't believe the Bible. Everything goes to hell in a handbasket and the world goes crazy. So they have this thing called Graffiti Alley. And it's like, it's a tour through like a simulated inner city slum with graffiti. And I'm like, man, you just
sketchy.
there you go. That's supposed to be symbolic of the worst of this world. Well, you just condemned a whole lot of people in society who happen to live in that kind of scenario. And so I don't, and at the same time they'll leave out, the beauties of the modern world. They'll put all this terrible, abortion and drugs and crack and murder rates and all this, but they don't, when they show the modern world as people who believe in evolution, they show it as really dark and sinister, and on more than one exhibit. And then on the other hand, creationist, when you go into a creationist space in the museum, it's light, it's bright, there's beautiful pictures, soft music playing. So they create this dual world, really weird. But at the same time, and this is something I talked about, that they'll screen out all this wonderful stuff about the modern age. Like we have great healthcare, St. Jude's Research Hospital, all of that's missing because science, they just take the worst anyway. So there's lots of stuff they do that it's like it's part horrifying and part intriguing. I can't really untie it all. But anyway, hope I didn't talk too much on that one.
Yeah, that's a lot. There's a lot there for sure. And I could ask many more questions, but trying to keep it relatively short and sweet. So I will stop us there. But thank you so much. It's so interesting I'll talk to all these, all our scholars and hear what their interests are and their expertise and everything. So thank you for sharing that with us.
My pleasure.
All right, great. See you soon.